Let's get started tonight. Well, before we start, do we have any visitors here with us? Any visitors? Yes. Finally. All right. And I just want to let you know that the bathrooms are down the hallway past the front desk to the right. And we ask that you please silence your cell phones. And thank you all so much for coming out tonight. And thank you to those of you who are watching from home. Tonight we have Newell Randall here for fossils of the northern neck and middle peninsula. He's a Virginia Tech graduate in philosophy and sociology and an amateur fossil collector with a display at the King and Queen County Courthouse Tavern Museum. Please welcome Newell Randall.
Hello. Thank you for having me here tonight. Normally this presentation is given to a different group of people, but I still have some of my same jokes I'm going to try, so bear with me for just a second. Okay, we're gonna be talking about sharks, and so I had to use my shark outfit there for you. Now I got to put my mask back on. Sorry about that. But I'll get to sharks later. First, I want to start with why we find all this stuff in King Queen County. And we'd find a whole lot of this in King Queen, King William, Northern Neck, Middle Peninsula, down the Eastern Shore, a vast area. And the reason is, for millions of years, we were underwater in this area. Didn't quite get to Ashland and Richmond in that particular map, okay? So if we go further west, we don't get in a lot of that. Then for millions of years, we were dry again. And then again, we were underwater for millions of years in a different pattern. And again, it shows you roughly where, but this time Ashland was covered with water and so on, some other areas. And then it went dry again for millions of years, and then millions of years again, we were underwater. What I like about what this map shows me is King Queen County was underwater all three of those times. And so we got everything that was deposited in those three time periods is right there in King Queen County. So we find things for millions of years spread. And I'm not real good at saying, how old is that? I'd have to look it up, and I don't retain the numbers as well as I used to. But that's why I'm here. That's why I'm a collector. Most of my collection came from King Queen County. Some of it came from Westmoreland along the Potomac River. So right out here, Westmoreland State Park. I used to hunt there. Then they closed the cliffs for safety reasons. I knew why, but it still was a good place to go. Normally, I would also talk to my clientele about, hey, where they can go to find them. Well, I don't know. The older I get, the less looking I do. So I don't know about you all, but I don't know if you all are still getting out there, putting on boots and getting out in the mud and the creeks. Anyway, I understand the older I get. So enough of that. Now, the kids in King Queen, King William County, they often referred to me as the fossil man. That's the nickname I picked up because I've given presentations many times over the years to the school systems out there. And I never have quite figured out, are they talking about this or my age? Hey, see, they like that. Anyway, that's one of my jokes. It's one of the only ones. Also, when I started doing this, giving presentations to different groups and to schools and all, I realized after a while that I had a groupie. And this gentleman was coming to all my events. And then he slowly stopped. He's now 100 years old, and he doesn't come to my events anymore. But I still call him my groupie, and real proud of him. All right, now, I'm going to start by talking about some of the simpler things that we find. And they were asking me earlier about some of these items. This is actually not a coral, it's a deposit. I did not find this. And a lot of this material, I'll tell you the truth, I didn't find some of these specific items. The bulk of my display, my good stuff, is on display at the King Queen County Tavern Museum, right there under that dot. Anyway, it's right there in King Queen County Courthouse Tavern and Museum. A lot of my traveling show was donated, believe it or not, by a man who saw a newspaper article about me in a paper. And he called me up one day and said he was having a situation and he needed to give away some stuff. So I made a couple of trips down there, met him, and hauled away stuff in my pickup truck and told him I'd make good use of it. So anyway, I give this gentleman credit. I have his name written down somewhere. I sure don't remember it. But he doesn't remember me now, so that's fair. Anyway, a lot of this material he found down in Norfolk and along the James River down in this area. And they were same thing as King Queen. They were underwater almost every one of these times also. So his material and my material overlapped. This is an example. It's one of the best examples I've seen in private collections of a barnacle collection on a nice old shell. And the shell, I believe, is a smaller version of this. Anyone know what's special about this particular shell to Virginia?
It's our state fossil.
Yes, our state fossil. The Jeffersonian, I believe? Okay, I remembered something still. That's good. I've only given this talk twice in the last, year and a half. So I'm getting a little rusty, but that's all right. Now, corals. We find corals all over the place. And there are occasions in certain areas of King Queen County where I come across a creek and there's coral, several different places in the same creek bed. So the creek, the surface dirt and sand and mud and clay has been eroded to the point where that used to be a coral reef way back in one of those periods of time. I'm not real good at dating this particular type of coral, but it's a very common, I think it's a star coral or something like that. I used to know the exact names, but I don't. But we find different types of corals. And then the clam shells. This is an interesting one that my friend down there in Newport News. I thought she was trying to communicate to me, like louder or whatever. If you can't hear me, wave or something, and I'll put the mic closer to my mouth, but I get a little boomy sometimes. So, snails. This is an inside mold of a snail shell. So the shell part would be on the outside, and this is the mold of what filled the inside of the shell, and that's pretty much what's left. There may be some of the shell left, but that's a pretty specimen. We also find inside molds of different types of clams. And so I got some of them up here for you to look at. Now, let's see. Something I find a lot of is something called the sea robin. I was finding these, and it took me a while before I started collecting them. I was finding them and didn't know what they were. And once I started seeing a lot of them, I realized, I better start picking these up and then keep my eyes open as I go to different museums and buy different books as to what is this. Now, I'm going to pass these around. Just keep moving them around the room as best you can and let everyone take a look. Sea robins was apparently a common fish. And what I understand is they're the ones that love to pick at coral. I've seen the modern day ones, and they actually show pictures of them kind of chewing at the coral a little bit. But what I have there are their skulls with the top beak. So some of those specimens, you'll see the beak there, the top beak. The bottom beak moves, and it's gone, okay? I never find them. Turned into sand someplace. But apparently these sea robin skulls are pretty prevalent. There must have been a whole lot of them, because I found a bunch. I have actually found, I don't have a specimen with me to show you, but I've found shrimp. Fossilized shrimp. Grass shrimp is what they were called. And so they were common, but to find something like that, when you looked for fossils as long as I have, and then you find something, you realize, I never found this before, so that's pretty neat. I enjoy that. A lot of times when I give this little talk to the kids in the counties, I try to get them interested in going out on their own and finding. So I tell them a lot about where I look, not specific, not down to the property owner and so on, but the different state parks where we can go, and it's common to find shark's teeth, which is what most people look for. But in those same places, we can find other things, and it's just a matter of knowing what they are and picking them up and taking a look at them. But what I like to make sure our children know is as long as they're safe and let someone know they're going and get permission from the landowner, the best place that I find to look are in the creeks of counties like my King-Queen County, where the water is running clean and clear. It's not swampy. I have never found a fossil in a swamp. You have to move too much clay, dirt, and mud. I need to have a stream of fresh running water and let nature do the work of getting all that other dirt and mud and everything, getting all that out of the way and leaving me with the gravel, sand, and in the gravel and sand beds is where I find fossils. And that's what's fun. So I'd tell them all about that and how to look. I didn't bring an example with me, but normally I would show them the net that I use. It's a common minnow net used by, it's from Walmart for about $7. And I've worn a lot of them out. But you take a scoop of gravel, you take a scoop of sand, and you just rinse it off, and then you pick through it and see what fossils you can find. Very common fossil that we find are skin scutes, S-C-U-T-E-S, I believe is how it's spelled. And these are from my understanding, there are a couple different types that you can find. One type is from a type of stingray. Another type is from turtles, and you got to be pretty good to know the difference between them. But I've got some of those we'll pass around. I'm sorry I don't have this one labeled, but you can look at these and see how they're. That's another example where I started finding these and didn't realize what they were. Luckily, I was keeping them because it was definitely a fossil imprint, and it turned out to be very interesting. And so those are kind of neat to find also. Now, I've talked about all that stuff. All right, now, some of the more interesting things to find. When we get into the upper critters, stingrays. Very common that we find a lot of material from stingrays. I want to make sure I'm not speaking too fast. Well, I am kind of going fast, but that's all right. We'll have a big, long question and answer period later. Stingrays are very interesting. They leave behind a couple of things that we find a lot of. The crusher plates, where they don't have teeth, but they do have crusher plates where they're crushing the mollusks, I understand, and things like that, and filtering them through. And also their skin scutes, S-C-U-T-E-S again. Another thing that we find sometimes are the tails of the stingray. And if you see this one example of a tail I have down at the bottom there, it's a thin, long piece, and it's has lines going the long way on it, and it's very distinctive from a lot of other fossils and things we find out there. So it's a fun thing to find. Another story, real quick story. I was lucky enough to be interviewed by Channel 8, I believe it was. Do you remember the name of that lady? I can't remember the name of the lady. Anyway, it'll come to me maybe later. Anyway, she agreed to come out and to meet with me, and I offered to take her on a fossil hunt. She got excited about that. Yeah, she wanted to go. Well, turned out she was, 5-6 months pregnant, put on boots, and she's a tough one. I took her on a hike. We drove as far as we could drive, and then we hiked from there with her cameraman, which turned out to be a distant relative of my wife, and had a great time showing her, and had her sifting and finding stuff, and she found something that I find is pretty rare, and I found a few of them, and doggone it, if she didn't, right in front of me, she found something that is called a crocodile tooth, saltwater crocodiles, okay, reptiles. It's easier to call them a reptile because that's definitely a bigger group, but there were those things in this area way back in the different periods of time where we had shallow waterways and so on. So we got reptile teeth. We have several different types of teeth in here that I'll pass this around also to take a look at. But usually we can tell when something is a tooth, and these are all teeth of various types. So pass that around also. Excuse me? Yeah, yes. She didn't find a shark tooth. And that's what's interesting. Shark teeth are the most common mammal fossil. See, ocean mammal? I need to find that quote again. Anyway, there are more shark's teeth than any other type of mammal fossil. Worldwide, they're found. Shark's teeth are everywhere. Kids find them all the time on the various beaches that we have. And it's a fun little thing to pick up. Another thing that we find from time to time, reptile teeth. Here are a couple different ones. Some of these can be from different types of, I don't get into specifics so much because I can't remember them. At least not so much as I used to. But different types of reptiles. I don't want to always say it's a gator, but there were a lot of different types of creepy crawly things back then in those days. Now, we're going to get into more of what I've been doing. Those are kind of sidelines. All that's kind of sidelines and special stuff when I find it. But we have a lot of vertebrae up here to show you. And big ones and little ones. Various, not all these, most of these are going to be whales. The bigger ones are whales. But we can have some small ones that are going to be whales also. But some are sea manatees. Some are going to be the other types of things like walruses, even porpoise, and that sort of animal, okay? We find a lot of that type of thing. Now, in Caroline County, how many, well, that's right, I was supposed to ask in the beginning. Are any of y'all from King Queen County or King William County? Northern Neck? Okay, in Middle Peninsula, very good. Well, in Caroline County, they found, that's all right, I just wanted you to look at, all right. I was trying to see if you all were paying attention. They found what they believe this whale looked like, and basically what they found was the skeleton of this whale. Then they had to project from there what it might have looked like. They actually don't have a picture of it for some reason. And it's extinct, and it's from way back, and they found that in Caroline County, the whole thing, and it's now at the Caroline Visitor Center, so we can actually go look, not at the actual skeleton, but we can go look at a plastic model of it. So that's a fascinating little thing right here in our area found. Good question.
Is it 5 foot long?
I think it's closer to 10 or 12 feet. Anyone remember that's been there or seen it? It is that long. Okay, thank you. I was hoping someone had actually been there to see it. I've known where it is and I've known of it, read articles about it, but I sure didn't remember the length. So we find vertebrae from good-sized whales. This is a pretty, not too heavy one. But sometimes these vertebrae can weigh a little bit more and be a little heavier. And when they are a little heavier, like this one's pretty heavy, there's an interesting thing about these. Is sometimes they're slightly radioactive. One time, from what I understand, one of the, further north, one of the power plants thought they had a radiation leak. And it turned out to be the fossil content of the area. And they narrowed it down and realized, no, this is natural. So sometimes these things can pick up that sort of thing. Lots of different types of vertebrae. Now, someone earlier was asking me about this one. Now, I did not find this. This, again, was from my friend from Newport News down in that area. This is a fascinating fossil because of it's the first one. It's the first neck vertebrae. It's what allows us and it's called the atlas, I believe. I think it's the atlas vertebrae. It's what allows you to do this and that, move your head all around. We have one, okay? Ours aren't like this, obviously, because this was a much bigger critter or a much bigger whale. But it allows your brain stem and all that to go through there to your back, to your back, but that's a fascinating piece. And I'm very pleased to have that as part of my mobile collection. I got to tell Amanda I'm sorry for the mess I made. Anyway, more vertebrae. Now, we also get into ribs. This is a pretty good sized rib. That's just the end piece of a long rib. That rib might have been 8-10 feet long, and this is just the tip. Don't know where the rest of it was. Again, that's from the same gentleman. He found that for me too. But I found other pieces of rib, and a lot of times, here's a good example of why we know this is a rib. And you all could come up and look at this material later, but in the inside, you can see the bone marrow. So you can tell this is not just a rock that has a smooth side and a rough side. We actually have the bone marrow in there, this one. Thank you. Let me see how I'm doing time-wise. Okay, I'm going too fast. Don't worry, we'll slow up a little bit. Now, something else about whales. My wife often tells this story about me. I found this nice, smooth rock, but I knew it wasn't a rock. I could just look at it and tell. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what it could be, but I kept it, and I would look at it real close, and I just kept telling my wife, this is something. I know it's something, but I didn't know what. Anybody know or care to guess what this actually turned out to be? After I studied it for several years. Cropolite. Anyone know what cropolite is? Poop. Petrified, probably whale poop or some other larger species. Who knows? But it's one of my favorites. It's a story my wife loves to tell about me. And after studying that for years, we finally figured out what it was. And we find some different examples. But this one is nicely worn down. But what's interesting is it shows all the folds. Anyway, take a look at that later. Now, this is something interesting. This is probably from what I understand, a baleen whale. I had some help with a lot of my material, especially the stuff that's on display at the museum. I brought a gentleman up named Dr. Johnson. He was a professor at William & Mary, mainly of geology, but boy, was he into paleontology and all that. And I was lucky enough to have a friend that knew him, and we brought him to the museum to help him while I was building my exhibit, to have him help me, making sure I was dotting my I's and crossing my T's, and I wasn't misleading anybody about anything. So he would help me and identify my stuff, and I would quickly write it down and label things and so on. But basically this size is from a baleen whale, and it's tympanic. Anyway, forgot the rest of it. It's the inner ear bone of a whale. Tympanic bulla. It came to me. And basically what this allows the whale to do, the thinner part of this is only part of one that broke up. I found over the years, yeah, that's a good idea. I found over the years that they are fragile. That one's no longer fragile because all that's left is the thick part. Here's one that is closer to being complete. And after surviving millions of years out in nature, I come and get it, and what do? I break it. It's like breaking a piece of your mother's china, oh, come on. But this one is almost intact, but it has a thick part and a very thin part, and that's the part that the nerves are attached to that receive, the thick part receives the low wavelengths of sound, and the thin part, my understanding is what helps the whale receive the high pitches. And whales, like we've known now, communicate with the high pitches locally, but they also communicate with those low rumbles from distance. This one is more complete, other than that little piece that I broke off. I won't pass that one around because one of you might finish it off. But anyway, it's here if you want to get a closer look at what a tympanic bulla looks like from a baleen whale. I have a nice one on display at the museum that I haven't broken yet. And I think it's been in that exhibit a couple of years now. As long as it stays there, it's pretty safe for me. So we'll probably keep it there a while longer. Now, we also find ribs not always whale ribs. That's whale. Well, this is a lot smaller. Could be something like anyway, yeah, something smaller. Walrus, I don't know how big their ribs get, but some of those walruses are pretty big critters. Then you got the sea manatees, things like that, things related to those. I'm sure it's probably something like that. And luckily, we have here a couple of joints. This might be from a whale. It might be one of the finger joints. The whales still have these little hands, little flipper hands. And this could be one of the joints from one of those hands. And this is another one. I would forget, flanges, I think those are called. And then the whales have teeth. And we find things like this that are, what's interesting about this particular tooth is you see how big it used to be, but the layers that broke off show you as that tooth grew and grew and grew, what the other smaller layers of it were like. And so we have that. Now, I was talking about whales, enough about whales. We were talking about, well, my favorite part is sharks. And this is what the kids get mostly excited about. I don't know what's going to excite you all, but we'll try to figure it out. Now, we have lots of different types of sharks. Nowadays, we have a whole bunch of different types of sharks that are alive today. And these are sharks of the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico, okay? And then we have stingrays. We have lots of stingrays, which we found parts of them. And now we're going to get into the sharks. This seems to be what the kids are fascinated with nowadays because they're all interested in this guy. And there are all sorts of movies out about this guy, the great white and the extinct great whites, and then the things they call the Meg. Yes. And I have to always be careful. Megalodon. That's how you pronounce it. It took me a long time. I was saying it wrong. Most people do say it wrong. But if you look at the spelling, it's Megalodon, Megalodon. All right, now let's talk about sharks. Now, I often say to the children, I'll pass this around, but you be careful. Don't let this one bite you. This is not a fossil. Of all the things I'm going to show you today, these are not fossil. In fact, one of the reasons I show these is to say, never buy one of these. Buying these nowadays supports the trade of people killing sharks just for their parts to sell, to make tourist trinkets like these. I had a daughter that gave me this one. I have this one, and before I learned about the problem, I bought a bigger one that's on display in my museum for training purposes. So all these are for training purposes, but I urge people not to go out and buy them. What I love about them, as far as giving information about sharks, is this kind of explains why we find so many shark's teeth. If you look at this jaw, you'll see layers and layers of teeth. A lot of those layers would have been in the gums. But when a shark breaks a tooth or a tooth has a problem, he ejects it and another one springs up. And often more than one layer of tooth will be available to it at one time. It helps it with cutting and grasping. If it's chewing on something, it wants it all to go down its stomach. It doesn't want a little hunk floating out here and a little hunk floating out there. The shark wants whatever it bites to go down. So these other teeth that are behind the initial teeth are there to grasp and make things go down the throat. So I'll pass this around, but take my word for it, it's sharp, okay? So don't, especially if you're a bleeder, don't be playing with that, okay? Those of us on aspirin and all that, be careful. Now, I think I started to talk about this a couple of times. The most common fossil found of mammals, sea mammals, okay, is the shark tooth. Some species of sharks will go through 20,000 teeth in a lifetime. They eject them whenever they outgrow them, they don't need it anymore, they bring up a new one gets broken, whatever, they eject it, and it falls to the bottom of the ocean and gets fossilized with everything else. And then millions of years later, people like me find them and go, oh boy, okay? I have found thousands of shark's teeth, and it's still a thrill every time. though I find myself now giving them away more often than I am keeping them. I didn't bring a box. That's one thing I didn't do for you all. I did not bring a box of shark teeth to give you all, to give away. But I always try to do that for kids. There are different groups that I've done things like, Science Night at J. Sargent Reynolds. I've done that a couple of years. And when the little children come around, hey, you want a shark tooth? I look at the mama or whoever's with them. Hey, can they have it? That type of thing. Now, I want to pass around some of the common shark's teeth that we do find. This first one's a snaggletooth shark. You'll see a little diagram of it. It's a common shark that we find. I don't know what the scientific name is. I learned the common names. I try not to clutter my brain with names that I'm not going to remember later on anyway, so you'll have to bear with me. We also have mako shark's teeth, which we will pass this around. There are lots of different types of makos. Even back then, there were makos. There was the narrow tooth mako, the wide mako, the wide tooth mako. The more I've learned about shark teeth, there are a lot of different varieties of some of these sharks. And then one of the more famous ones is the tiger because of its eating habits. And so here's a tiger shark's teeth of different sizes. And here's some more makos. We'll pass this around because this has more variety in it than the other one on makos. A lot of different types of mako teeth. We actually find some very, very small shark's teeth. Teeny tiny. In fact, I should have led with those. I put this on a card just so it wouldn't get lost, but so that everyone, you won't have to worry about handling it. It's there. I have a whole bunch of little tiny ones in here that are good to look at. Real small shark's teeth. Now, I do have one here that's, I'm afraid I don't have the information on what type of shark it was. But this is someone that said, I don't know what that is. A lot of this other stuff was common, but what is this? I can't explain what type it is, but it was a type of shark, and it's a very unusual tooth, and it's the only one I've ever found. Oh, here we go. Possible tooth jaw fragment. Oh, well, that doesn't tell me. I was hoping maybe I'd written down what it was so I'd remember. Mako sharks. Here's a nice, this one is too big to fit in that little container. Now, sometimes some of these can actually be a mako, or it might be a great white. Some of the experts confuse me sometimes when they debate some of this stuff. I try to stay out of the debates. Now, one thing that's interesting about those snaggletooth teeth that I was passing around out there is it's got a serrated edge. Any of you all that have ever worked with a serrated knife, it's got a serrated edge. And what's fascinating about some of these really pristine examples is you can actually see the light through the ends of these serrations on how, that just shows you how thin they are and how sharp they really are. So that's a good example of that, of being able to see through those, see the light through them. Now, let's talk a little bit about sharks ejecting teeth. Let's say this shark bit into something and his tooth was damaged, he'd eject it. Now this tooth is damaged, only half of it is here. That was probably not done during the mealtime, okay? This was probably done when this tooth, millions of years later, after being fossilized and brought to the surface by erosion again, and what happens? Water gets in it, goes through a freeze-frost cycle, and next thing you know, it splits. This would have been a beautiful tooth to find if it hadn't split and a lot of the gum line, the material above the gum line hadn't been lost. But it's a good example to show you what happens to teeth when they're, good, no blood on it. Y'all did pretty good on that. I appreciate that. This tooth also shows wear and tear. Again, not from eating, but from just weathering, okay? The enamel starts to break off, flake off. This one is actually some of the enamel, even though this tooth is 1,000,000 years old, maybe 2, maybe more, it's very weak, and some of this material can fall off. So I try to handle these things pretty carefully. Now, got a different story. Up here it is. I keep the good stuff in my pockets if y'all haven't figured that out. This tooth I found one day. I was looking on some land, and I was moving from one creek to another creek on a piece of my wife's aunt's and uncle's property. And the first tooth that I found in this new creek that I was going to was this one. And I looked down in the water and I go, man, it can't be that easy. Now, it was freezing outside, and I wasn't going to get wet, but I had to get that tooth. And I didn't come prepared. But anyway, I got that tooth. I wasn't going to let that get covered up with sand again. But what's interesting about this tooth is the story it has to tell. Hopefully, if y'all can see, this tooth has a notch. Now, that notch was not caused by weather and freeze-thaw cycle, okay? This tooth was damaged during the consumption of something, chewing on some bone or some critter or something it was eating. The shark might have been chomping on a whale and, tried to take on something a little too hard, and that tooth was ejected. So that's probably an ejection tooth, different from the ones that are weather damaged. This beautiful little tooth tells the story of ejection. And I love the color of it, and I've hung on to that. It's definitely one of my favorites. Now, let's see. What else have I got in these pockets? Testing. There we go. All right, let me get something out of this pocket. All right. Another nice tooth. Little clumsier, little dirtier. A lot of this is material that gets on the tooth after it's been fossilized and contaminated by something, but it's still a good-sized tooth. What I really love are some of the bigger teeth that I can find. Oh, in fact, I used to have 2 of these. The other one must be at home. Anyway, I've got 2 of these very similar to this one. One more besides this one. I found 2 of these 18 inches apart in the fuller's earth of a creek I was looking at in 20 hours apart. I was searching this one area and I found one of these. The next day I thought, I'm going back to that exact same spot and do a little more look, and shoot enough, found another. Most likely, and they're not damaged from ejection, most likely the remains of that shark ended up somewhere around there, and those shark's teeth were just out of the cartilage, and that's where they ended up. And I found 2 of them about the same size, same age. And what's nice about them is they have that serrated edge. These are great whites, Megalodon. They're beautiful examples of shark's teeth. And some shark's teeth, when they're fossilized, are nice, beautiful black and shiny. Some are brown. Like I said, this one of my favorites is the light browns that are in this are really sweet. But that's a nice tooth. Now, I got a story to tell. One time I was hunting for shark's teeth in my wife's aunt's property, and I found this big hunk of tooth, but it wasn't the whole thing. Didn't have the tip, but I had part of the root and a big, wide section of it. It was so thick. The tooth was this thick. And I knew this was part of a major tooth that I just found. Biggest tooth. It was a piece of the biggest tooth I would have ever found in my life, okay? And I took it to my wife's aunt, and I was showing her, and she said, well, go to that cabinet over there. My husband found something similar to that 15, 20 years ago. And I went and looked, and sure enough, the 2 pieces fit. Found 15, 20 years apart, both on his property. So it's very likely he found one part of it when he walked across that creek someplace. He wasn't a fossil hunter like me, but doggone, he'd pick up a thing or 2 when he saw it. He'd find an arrowhead or a spear point, or he'd find a piece of and his had the point to that shark's tooth. And doggone, if they do match up. And that is on display at the King Queen County Courthouse Tavern Museum. So that's there in the center of the exhibit to be seen. And it's bigger than this picture, if you can imagine. That thing is a good 6 inches tall. Beautiful too. So sometime if you ever have a chance, I think Covenant Woods has in the past had trips up there to our county and visited our museum. At least that's what I've been told. So those are some of my better stories. Am I finishing way too early? Yeah, okay, we got 20 minutes. I've introduced a lot of topics, shown you a lot of different things. Is there anything you all are curious about or have any good questions or bad questions? I'll be glad to try to answer anything. Yes, ma'am.
Are all of your finds creek finds?
Almost all. Some of these are river finds. That gentleman that gave them to me, I think he would go wading out in the water, and he had access to some areas that are now closed around military bases and things like that, where he could get in the water and go on out and find things in low tide and so on. But most of mine, yes, are most of my better material, not all of it, but most of it is from creeks. I used to go to Westmoreland State Park a lot. Then they closed the banks. And the problem with the cliffs is the fall. If you're ever there and that cliff gives way, I used to take my daughters with me. And I tell my wife, it's fine, it's fine. And then I told the daughters when we got there, if a bunch of stuff starts to fall, I want you to go swimming. Didn't matter how cold it was, because we would go, it'd be freezing cold, and we're out there in rubber boots and coats, and we're looking for fossils. They loved hunting fossils. But I always try to tell them, if it looks like something's starting to fall from up there, we're not going to stay here and watch it. We're going to go out there in the water, okay? I was there once, without my daughters, luckily, when a landslide occurred. I was in one part of Westmoreland State Park, and around the bend from me of the cliffs is where the landslide occurred. And I heard it, and then I saw a little wake of water go out into the bay. It displaced so much water, I don't know if it was a 6-inch or 12-inch little wave went out. The next time I was there, I hiked down further, what they called, I think they still call it Shark Tooth Beach. And I started looking there, and then from there I could see where the fall was. The fall wasn't on Westmoreland State Park property. It was on property just to the west, no, to the east of it, along the Potomac River there. And it was, the fall was as big as a couple of large houses, 2-story, 2.5-story houses. And that was scary. That could happen. It happened so fast. I was over there one time looking for fossils as it started to wash out, and fossils were all over the place because the material was getting washed out. The sand and the mud from the fuller's earth was getting washed away, and fossils were just lying around, and it was great. But anyway, they closed the cliffs. I went once or twice after they made it illegal to do that. It wasn't any fun sneaking around. I haven't been back. Luckily, my wife's uncle, he kept telling me over the years, if I'm into fossils, he says, you ought to go look at the bottom, at the creek behind the pond that he had there. But anytime I went to that piece of property, I was out fishing. I loved to fish. I was catching fish for years. I have fished that pond longer than I've been married to my wife. I've been married to her almost 43 years. Anyway, I wasn't interested in looking for shark teeth when I wanted to catch fish. One day, though, one of my daughters, as she grew up, about there, she had to do a study. She was in fishery science at Virginia Tech, go Hokies, and she needed to do some sort of study on the animal and plant life or animal life in a creek, the bugs and things like that in the creek. And so she decided to do this study at the Marlboro Creek, or this creek in King Queen County that will remain anonymous. Anyway, but wife said, my daughter's not going to be out there all by herself. And so I went with her. So my daughter is taking samples and finding bugs and showing me, this is this and this is that, and taking her samples and closing it up and writing notes and all that. And I had nothing to do, so I'm just stumbling around. All of a sudden, shark tooth. shark tooth. And just like my wife's uncle had said, there were shark teeth down there. And I've been searching the freshwater streams of King Queen County ever since, and done quite well at it, finding all the different types of things. And I do find some of the bigger things too there, but it's fun. It keeps me out of trouble. As I tell people, another one of my jokes, get ready for this. The only bars I go to and taverns I go to in King Queen County are the sandbars and the gravel bars and the tavern at King Queen County Tavern Museum. So anyway, somehow I got off topic there a little bit, but that's the story of my history of fossil hunting. I still have some time for some more questions, or if you all want to, yes?
Did you get her turned into finding fossils?
Now, here's the thing. I made a mistake years ago telling her a story. One time I was finding fossils. This spider floats by on the surface of the water going down the creek. And it was all over. Or if I tell her about, well, we're hiking along, here's this snake. No, we didn't bother him and he didn't bother us, but there was a snake and there were spiders. And so, no. And my youngest daughter, one time we were out at Westmoreland State Park, and she's a trooper. She's trudging along, but we were in mud sometimes, terrible mud. That Fuller's Earth, when it gets wet, is just so sticky. And she pulls up her foot one time, and there's her sock. Where's her boot? Her boot was buried in the mud. We finally got her boot out, and when we got to the vehicle, she realized she'd lost her vial. She keeps I always train my daughters, when you go shark tooth hunting, you carry something to put all your treasures in. And when she apparently lost the boot, her vial fell out and she lost all her shark tooth she'd found that day. And that was it for her. I don't know if I ever got her to go back. But anyway, one of my daughters still loves to do that. We just don't get a chance to do it very often. She's raising two of my granddaughters for me. And so anyway, she's got her hands full right now. Anyway, I hope I answered the question. Yes, sir.
Radioactive vertebrae, was that carbon-14 or did they identify it?
I don't know if they have identified it. They probably, somebody that knows about radiation probably does, but I don't know. All I know is some of the heavier ones is that was the rule of thumb I was told by Dr. Johnson. He's the one that told me that. Hey, some of those are radioactive. The ones that are very heavy, very dense, they can sometimes have a little bit of radiation going on. That might explain a couple of the cancers I've had, but yeah, there again, I'm not as technical as I should be on some of this stuff. Any other questions? Yes. Yeah, he's an incredible man. When I had him with me, helping me with my exhibit, I felt like I was in a classroom because he would ask me questions and make me answer the questions. And I realized I was being taught, okay? This guy was the epitome of a teacher. And, he was so good. I hope he's still kicking. The last time I heard from him, he was. But moved out west. Is that what you heard? That's why I haven't heard from him lately. Okay. Oh, wow. Hopefully he found someplace out there to settle down and good for his health. Any other questions? Yes? This is a more central vertebrae of a whale. Yeah, real big one. This is the atlas vertebrae. That's what allows the whales can actually move their top of their head around a little bit like that. This is, again, the atlas vertebrae that allows us, our skull, to float around and to move. Another vertebrae, but has more of the rib sections coming off of it, the wings. I believe that's where the ribs attach. I think I got that right. Like I said, I studied sociology and philosophy in college, and doggone, I wished I'd been a geologist and a paleontologist, just because of where my hobby took me. But I started collecting fossil shark teeth back in the 60s when I was 8, 9 years old up in Maryland, near the Potomac River, near the Chesapeake Bay. This is part of Maryland right up here. A lot of shark teeth up there. I was at a I was at a Boy Scout camp for boys, that's right. Both my brothers were Boy Scouts. I was too young still, and they brought me, my parents and I went up to pick them up, and they said, we're going to take you down to this beach where you can find shark's teeth. Oh, wow. And I did. I found shark's teeth, and that's what got me started. Then I took my wife shark tooth hunting before we had children, and then we went after one time. One time. And then I took my daughters when they were old enough and could follow their daddy in the mud and all that. Because when I go shark tooth hunting, I mean, we have a shirt of mine, because I wear these outfits, so I know that's a shark tooth outfit. But this one shirt came back smelling so bad. It's been several years, and we still cannot get the stink out of it, okay? And it's not just my stink. It was the stink of the mud that I was into. It was terrible. And she's tried everything. Every now and then I wear that. She said, that's that shirt, isn't it? She marked it with a big X. Don't wear this around people. Any other questions? Anything else?
So the King and Queen Creeks, is all of it private? Is there anywhere anybody like me can get in, or is it all private? You have to get permission.
All the creeks I've hunted in are private, but there are some public lands around the Dragon Swamp, keyword swamp. I've never looked for a fossil in the swamp, especially the Dragon Swamp, someday I want to do some kayaking in there, but I've never found anywhere in there to look. It's pretty much a matter of getting permission from landowners. Now, for me, I'm lucky this happened at this stage of my life, because the big hunk of land that I used to hunt, the creeks, was sold out of the family. And that was okay, because the other side of that creek was the dividing line, and I could still go to the creek from some friends of the family. And then that piece of land got sold by that family. And it turned out the same man bought both pieces, and he now controls what I think is the best fossil hunting in the area. And I need to get back in touch with him and say, hey, remember me? I'm the one that toured you around your property, and see if I can get in there again. It's hunting season, so this is not a good time of year to be poking around. But come spring, I may touch base and try to touch base with that owner. So there are some state forests in the area, but I've had this conversation with some of the state forests people, and there was a group that was interested in having me come out and give a little talk on fossil hunting to a group that was going to be using the state forest as their playground. And they were going to have a lot of talks on a lot of different subjects having to do with the ecology and so on. And so my stuff fit in a little bit. So I went there and asked the forest people, hey, can I take these kids fossil hunting on your property? Because I'm sure if you've got some moving water someplace, which they do, that maybe there'd be a chance. And they said, no, we're not allowed to look or hunt for any relics, anything in those state forests. Now, if you had a national forest for rockhounds and so on, here's a funny story. When I went out west, oh man, I just love to find things. But when I'm in a national park, man, I need to keep my hands in my pockets, because you're not allowed to pick up anything. Okay, you can get in big trouble with the federal government. But if you walk out of the national park and you're in a national forest, Bureau of Land Management stuff. Luckily, one day I walked into an office that had National Parks people and Bureau of Land Management, National Forest people, and I asked that question, hey, where can I go where I can legally pick up something? I'm a rock hound. I'd love to pick up something. And they said, well, if you want a truckload, you'll have to fill out this permit. And here we were out west, I didn't want a truckload, but I wouldn't mind a small box full, and I found out I could. So sometimes when we were driving around out west with our daughters, I would stop the car by the side of the road, leave the air conditioning running, and I would take 5 minutes to go out real quick and find something and put it in my pocket and put it in the back of the vehicle. Yeah, I may have found too many because that vehicle actually didn't make it home without losing transmission. That's a true story, too. But yeah, I found out where it was legal and where it wasn't nationwide. But I'm afraid the best place to look are Westmoreland State Park at the Fossil Beach, that they call it. You have to hike about a mile, a half mile to get to that. That's a good spot. Then you got Chip Oaks State Park. Chip Oaks Plantation State Park. You take the ferry from where we live over there to get to that. It's kind of a neat place. We camp out there, and I've done some looking there. I think my daughter wants to take her 2 daughters there, and we're going to go there. Now I went there, and I found a few. I was having trouble winding things up. Okay, thank you. She gave me that signal. But so we're going to plan on taking a trip there and do some looking, see what we can find. But I found a few shark teeth last time I was there, and I ended up giving them all away to kids that came by. I didn't need to take any more home. Unless it's something really odd and rare like this one, then yeah, I'm going to take it home and look it up. Thank you very much for having me. Y'all are a pretty good group. You laughed at my jokes, and that's it.
Thank you all so much for coming out tonight, and thank you everyone for watching from home. Sorry. And thank you to Mr. Randall for showing us this awesome fossil display. One more round of applause. All right. Thank you all, and have a nice evening.